The water closed over Katherine Thompson's head for the third time, and she knew with terrible certainty that she was going to die in Willow Creek on a Tuesday afternoon in May of 1876, just 2 miles from the Colorado City settlement where she had lived for the past 3 months. The current had seemed so gentle when she had stepped in to retrieve her mother's washing that had tumbled from the basket, but the spring runoff from the mountains had turned the normally placid stream into something treacherous and unforgiving. Her sodden skirts wrapped around her legs like iron chains, pulling her down, and her lungs burned with the desperate need for air. She fought against the pull of the water, her arms flailing uselessly, but exhaustion was winning the battle. Through the roaring in her ears, she thought she heard hoofbeats, but that seemed impossible, a trick of her oxygen-starved brain creating comfort where none existed. Ethan Burke had been riding the fence line of the Double Bar Ranch for 3 hours when he caught sight of something pale thrashing in the creek below. His bay gelding scout sensed his sudden tension and responded immediately when Ethan dug his heels in, launching down the embankment at a reckless pace. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he realized what he was seeing. A woman, drowning, her dark hair spread across the water's surface like spilled ink. He did not pause to think, did not consider the danger or the cold mountain water still carrying winter's bite. He hit the ground running before Scout had fully stopped, his boots pounding across the rocky shore, and then he was diving into the creek, the shock of the cold water stealing his breath. His strong arms cut through the current with powerful strokes. Ethan had grown up swimming in these mountain streams, had learned to respect their power and navigate their moods. He reached Katherine just as she went under again, his hand closing around her arm with an iron grip. She struggled against him weakly, her movements uncoordinated and panicked, but he turned her face up toward the sky and locked his arm across her chest, kicking hard against the current that wanted to claim them both. The shore seemed impossibly far away, his muscles burning with effort, but Ethan Burke had broken wild horses and wrestled steers to the ground, and he was not about to let this creek take another life. His boots finally found purchase on the creek bed, and he hauled Katherine up onto the muddy bank, laying her on her side as she coughed up water, her whole body convulsing with the effort. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand on her back, water streaming from his own clothes and hair. "You are all right now," he said, his voice rough with exertion and relief. "Just breathe. You are safe." Katherine's eyes opened, unfocused and confused, and she found herself staring into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The man kneeling beside her had sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly when wet, and there was genuine concern etched into every line of his handsome face. She tried to speak, but another fit of coughing seized her, and he helped her sit up, supporting her weight easily. "Take your time," Ethan said, and there was something calming in his tone, something that made Katherine feel safe despite the fact that she had nearly died moments before. "What is your name?" "Katherine," she managed to gasp out between coughs, her throat raw and burning. "Katherine Thompson. I live in Colorado City with my mother. I was washing clothes and one of the sheets got away from me, and I just stepped in to get it, but the current was so much stronger than I thought. The snowmelt from the high country turns these creeks into killers this time of year," Ethan said, helping her to her feet. She swayed unsteadily, and he kept his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "You are lucky I was riding past. Not many folks come through this stretch. I am Ethan Burke. I work at the Double Bar Ranch about 5 miles north of town." Katherine looked down at herself and felt heat rise to her cheeks despite her shivers. Her dress was plastered to her body, completely immodest, and her hair hung in wet ropes down her back. She had lost her shoes somewhere in the creek, and mud covered her feet and the hem of her dress. She must look absolutely wretched. "I must look a fright," she said, her voice still hoarse. "You look alive," Ethan said simply, and there was something in his gaze that made Katherine's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her near drowning. "That is what matters. Can you ride? My horse can carry us both back to town. You need to get into dry clothes before you catch your death of cold." Katherine nodded, still shivering violently. The May sunshine felt weak against her wet skin, and now that the immediate danger had passed, the cold was settling deep into her bones. Ethan whistled, and his bay horse trotted over obediently. He mounted first, then reached down and lifted Catherine up in front of him with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. She found herself cradled against his chest, his arms on either side of her as he gathered the reins, and despite her bedraggled state, she could not help but notice how solid and warm he felt, how safe she felt in his embrace. The ride into Colorado City took 20 minutes, and Catherine used the time to study her rescuer from beneath her lashes. He had to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 25 or 26, with the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His clothes were practical, worn denim and a chambray shirt that was now soaked through, and he wore a gun belt with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. But it was his face that captivated her. The strong jaw and straight nose, the way small lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He was handsome in a rugged, wholly masculine way that made something flutter in Catherine's chest. "How long have you lived in Colorado City?" Ethan asked, his voice rumbling through his chest where Catherine rested against him. 3 months, Catherine replied, grateful for the distraction from her chaotic thoughts. My mother and I moved here from Kansas after my father died. He had a business partner here, Mr. Samuel Warren, who offered my mother work keeping house for him. He is a widower with no children, and his place was falling apart without a woman's touch. It seemed like a good opportunity for a fresh start. "I am sorry about your father," Ethan said, and Catherine could hear the sincerity in his voice. "That must have been hard, leaving everything you knew behind." "It was," Catherine admitted. "But Kansas held too many memories, too much grief. My mother thought a new place might help us both heal. And Colorado City is beautiful, even if I have just learned to respect its waterways a bit more." Ethan chuckled, a warm sound that Catherine felt as much as heard. "That is a good lesson to learn, though I wish you had learned it less dramatically. These mountains, this land, they are beautiful but unforgiving. You have to know their moods, respect their power." "Spoken like someone who was born here," Catherine said. "Close enough. My family came to Colorado when I was 5 years old, back in 1856. My father was chasing gold fever like so many others, but he was smart enough to realize that the real money was in ranching, not mining. He started the Double Bar with his brother, my Uncle Thomas. They built it up from nothing, turned it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. My father died 2 years ago, thrown from a horse, and Uncle Thomas followed him 6 months later. Heart just gave out one day. So now I run the Double Bar with my younger brother, James. We have got 200 head of cattle, 15 horses, and more work than 2 men can handle most days." Catherine heard the grief in his voice when he spoke of his father and uncle, a grief she understood all too well. "That must be incredibly difficult," she said softly, "losing them both so close together." "It was," Ethan admitted. "Some days it still is. But the ranch keeps me busy, keeps me focused. There is always something that needs doing, and cattle do not care if you are grieving or not. They still need to be fed and watered and moved to fresh grazing. It is good, honest work, hard, but satisfying." They rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Catherine found herself acutely aware of every point where her body touched Ethan's. His warmth was slowly seeping into her cold skin, and she had stopped shivering quite so violently. She knew she should feel awkward, sitting so intimately with a man she had just met, but instead she felt oddly at peace, as though this was somehow exactly where she was supposed to be. Colorado City came into view as they crested a small rise, a collection of wooden buildings sprawling along both sides of the main street. It was not a large town, perhaps 300 residents at most, but it had the essentials: a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith, and a small schoolhouse that also served as the community center for town meetings and social gatherings. Catherine's mother worked for Samuel Warren, whose house sat on the eastern edge of town, a well-maintained 2-story structure that was considerably nicer than most of the other buildings. Ethan guided Scout directly to the Warren house, and Catherine saw her mother burst through the front door before they had even dismounted, her face white with worry. Eleanor Thompson was a handsome woman in her early 40s, with dark hair just beginning to show threads of silver and the same warm brown eyes as her daughter. "Catherine!" Eleanor cried, rushing down the front steps. "What happened? You are soaking wet. Are you hurt?" "I am fine, Mother," Catherine said, as Ethan helped her down from the horse. Her legs were still unsteady, and she was grateful for his steadying hand. "I had an accident at the creek, but Mr. Burke here saved my life. If he had not ridden past when he did, I would have drowned." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, then turned to Ethan with an expression of profound gratitude. "How can we ever thank you, Mr. Burke? You saved my daughter's life." "No thanks necessary, madam," Ethan said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time. But you should get Catherine inside and into dry clothes quickly. That water was cold, and I do not want her taking ill." Samuel Warren had appeared in the doorway, a tall, spare man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. "Bring her inside immediately, Eleanor," he called. "I will have Mary heat water for a bath, and Mr. Burke, you should come in as well. You are as wet as Catherine, and it is the least we can do to offer you hospitality after what you have done." Ethan hesitated, glancing down at his dripping clothes. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Warren, but I do not want to impose." "Nonsense," Samuel said firmly. "You saved this young woman's life. The least we can do is provide you with hot coffee and a chance to dry out. I insist." Catherine found herself hoping Ethan would accept the invitation, though she told herself it was only because he deserved their thanks and hospitality, not because she wanted to spend more time with him. She caught his eye and smiled. "Please stay, Mr. Burke. I would feel terrible if you caught pneumonia on your way home because you stopped to help me." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, his green eyes warming. "Well, when you put it that way, Miss Thompson, I suppose I cannot refuse." Eleanor ushered Catherine inside and up to her bedroom, where Mary, the young woman who helped with cooking and cleaning, was already hauling buckets of hot water for a bath. Catherine's mother helped her out of her sodden dress, clucking over her like a worried hen, checking for bruises and scrapes. "Mother, I am fine," Catherine protested, though she had to admit the hot bath felt absolutely heavenly after the icy creek water. "Please do not fuss so." "I will fuss as much as I like," Eleanor said firmly. "You nearly died today, Catherine. When I think about what could have happened if that young man had not ridden past, I feel ill. We owe him an enormous debt." Catherine sank deeper into the steaming water, letting it warm her chilled bones. "He seems like a good man," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Very kind and capable." Eleanor gave her daughter a knowing look. "He is also quite handsome," she observed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And unmarried, unless I miss my guess. He did not wear a ring, and there was something in the way he looked at you, dear." "Mother!" Catherine felt her cheeks flush. "He just saved my life. He was concerned for my well-being, nothing more." "If you say so," Eleanor said, but her smile suggested she did not believe it for a moment. "But you cannot blame me for noticing. You are 22 years old, Catherine, and beautiful. It is only natural that a young man would notice you, and that you might notice him in return." Catherine did not respond, but as she washed the creek water from her hair, she found her thoughts drifting back to Ethan Burke, to the way his arms had felt around her on the ride back to town, to the warmth in his green eyes when he smiled. She told herself firmly that she was simply grateful to him for saving her life, that what she felt was nothing more than natural appreciation for her rescuer. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that it might be something more. Downstairs, Ethan sat in Samuel Warren's parlor, a cup of hot coffee warming his hands. Samuel had provided him with a blanket to wrap around his shoulders while his clothes dried by the fire, and the older man sat across from him with an expression of profound gratitude. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did today, Mr. Burke," Samuel said seriously. "Catherine and her mother have only been with me for a few months, but I have grown quite fond of them both. Eleanor is the finest housekeeper I have ever employed, and Catherine is a lovely young woman, bright and kind. The thought of what might have happened if you had not been riding past fills me with dread." "I am just glad I could help," Ethan said honestly. "No one deserves to die in a creek because they were trying to retrieve laundry." Samuel smiled slightly. "True enough. Tell me, how are things at the Double Bar? I heard you and your brother have been making improvements to the property." Ethan spent the next 20 minutes discussing ranch business with Samuel, who had a keen interest in the cattle industry and proved to be well informed about market prices and the challenges facing ranchers in the territory. It was a pleasant conversation, and Ethan found himself liking the older man, appreciating his sharp mind and dry wit. When Catherine finally came downstairs, dressed in a simple blue dress with her dark hair braided and still damp, Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. She was beautiful, truly beautiful, with delicate features and expressive brown eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. He stood immediately, setting aside his coffee cup. "Miss Thompson," he said, "you look much recovered. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Catherine said, moving into the room with a grace that Ethan found captivating. "The hot bath did wonders. I wanted to thank you again, Mr. Burke, for what you did. You saved my life, and I will never forget that." "I am just glad I was there," Ethan said, and found he meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. The thought of Catherine drowning in that creek, of her light being snuffed out before he had even met her, filled him with a cold horror that surprised him with its intensity. Eleanor appeared with a plate of fresh baked cookies and more coffee, insisting that Ethan eat something before he rode back to the Double Bar. The conversation flowed easily, and Ethan found himself drawn into the warm circle of this small household. Samuel proved to be an excellent host. Eleanor was gracious and kind, and Catherine was intelligent and articulate, with a quick wit that kept him on his toes. More than once he caught her watching him, and when their eyes met, she would blush and look away, a response that Ethan found utterly charming. The afternoon sun was slanting low through the windows when Ethan finally rose to leave. His clothes were mostly dry, though still slightly damp in places, but he had been away from the ranch for hours, and James would be wondering what had happened to him. Catherine walked him to the door, and on impulse, Ethan found himself speaking before he had fully thought through what he wanted to say. "Miss Thompson, I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you," he said, his heart beating faster than it had when he had jumped into the creek. "Perhaps this Sunday after church? I know we have only just met, but I would very much like to see you again, under less dramatic circumstances." Catherine's face lit up with a smile that made Ethan's breath catch. "I would like that very much, Mr. Burke," she said softly. "Very much indeed." As Ethan rode back toward the Double Bar, Scout's hooves beating a steady rhythm against the packed earth, he found himself grinning like a fool. He had started this day expecting nothing more interesting than checking fence lines and maybe spotting a few strays. Instead, he had pulled a beautiful woman from a creek and somehow, impossibly, found himself counting the hours until Sunday when he could see her again. Life, Ethan reflected, had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. At the ranch, his brother James was waiting on the porch, his arms crossed over his chest and a concerned expression on his face. James was 3 years younger than Ethan, with the same dark hair and green eyes, though his features were slightly softer, less weather-worn. At 23, he was still growing into himself, still finding his place in the world, but he was a good man and a hard worker, and Ethan counted himself lucky to have such a reliable partner. "Where have you been?" James demanded as Ethan dismounted. "You have been gone for hours and you are all wet. What happened?" Ethan grinned at his brother and launched into the story of Catherine's near drowning and his subsequent rescue. James listened with wide eyes, shaking his head in amazement. "So let me get this straight," James said when Ethan had finished. "You jumped into Willow Creek during spring runoff to save a woman you did not even know, nearly got yourself drowned in the process, and now you are courting her?" "That is the most Ethan thing I have ever heard." "I am not courting her yet," Ethan protested, though he could not quite keep the smile off his face. "I am merely calling on her Sunday after church." "That is courting," James said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "And I am glad for you, truly. You have been alone since Sarah left, and it is high time you found someone who appreciates you. What is this Catherine like?" Ethan thought about how to answer that question, trying to put into words the complicated tangle of emotions and impressions from the afternoon. "She is beautiful," he said finally, "and smart and kind. She nearly died this afternoon, but once she recovered, she was cracking jokes and putting everyone at ease. There is something special about her, James. I cannot quite explain it, but I felt it the moment I pulled her from that creek." James studied his brother's face, then nodded slowly. "Then you should pursue this," he said seriously. "Life is too short to let opportunities pass you by. Father always said that when you meet the right person, you will know. Maybe Katherine Thompson is your right person." Sunday could not come fast enough for Ethan. He threw himself into ranch work with his usual intensity, but found his thoughts constantly drifting to Catherine, to the way she had felt in his arms on the ride back to town, to her warm brown eyes and quick smile. He had been attracted to women before, had even been briefly engaged to Sarah Mitchell 3 years ago, before she had broken it off to marry a banker's son from Denver, but this felt different. This felt like something that could change the course of his entire life. Saturday evening, he bathed carefully and laid out his best clothes for church. Sunday morning, he was up before dawn, completing his chores with unusual speed and efficiency. James watched his brother's preparations with barely concealed amusement. "You are going to wear a hole in the floor with all that pacing," James observed as Ethan checked his appearance in the small mirror for the third time. "You look fine. Better than fine. Now get going before you wear yourself out with nervous energy." The small church in Colorado City was nearly full when Ethan arrived, its wooden pews packed with families dressed in their Sunday best. Ethan scanned the congregation and found Catherine sitting near the front with her mother and Samuel Warren. As though sensing his gaze, Catherine turned, and when her eyes met his, she smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made Ethan's heart skip several beats. The service seemed to last forever, Reverend Mitchell droning on about some parable or another that Ethan could not focus on because he was too busy thinking about the woman sitting 3 rows ahead. Finally, mercifully, the Reverend concluded his sermon, and the congregation filed out into the bright May sunshine. Ethan made his way through the crowd to where Catherine stood, talking with several other young women. She looked beautiful in a green dress that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, her dark hair pinned up in an elegant style that left soft tendrils framing her face. "Miss Thompson," Ethan said, touching his hat, "you look lovely this morning." "Thank you, Mr. Burke," Catherine replied, her cheeks flushing pink in a way that Ethan found absolutely enchanting. "You clean up rather well yourself." Her companions giggled at this exchange, and Catherine shooed them away with a playful gesture before turning back to Ethan. "I believe you mentioned calling on me this afternoon?" "If the offer still stands," Ethan said. "I thought perhaps we could take a walk, maybe down by the creek. The upper stretch where it is calmer," he added quickly. Catherine laughed, a musical sound that Ethan decided he could happily listen to for the rest of his life. "I think I can manage that," she said, "though I promise to stay well away from the water's edge this time." They walked through town together, drawing curious glances from the other townspeople. Colorado City was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and Ethan was well aware that by tomorrow morning, half the town would be speculating about his interest in Katherine Thompson. He found he did not care. Let them talk. He had nothing to hide. The upper stretch of Willow Creek was indeed calmer than the section where Ethan had rescued Catherine. the water flowing gently over smooth stones, creating a peaceful burbling sound. They followed the bank upstream, walking slowly, and Ethan found himself telling Katherine about his life, about growing up on the double bar, about his dreams for the ranch's future. I want to expand our operation, he explained as they paused beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Buy more land, increase our herd. There is good grazing land to the north that came up for sale last month, 300 acres with natural springs and good grass. If I can scrape together the money, I want to make an offer. That sounds ambitious, Katherine said, her eyes bright with interest. What is stopping you? Money, mostly, Ethan admitted. Ranching is expensive, and while the double bar is profitable, we do not have a lot of extra capital lying around. But I am hoping this year's cattle drive will bring in enough to make the down payment. We are planning to take our herd to market in Kansas in July. If we get good prices, I will have what I need. Kansas, Katherine said softly. That is where my mother and I came from. What town are you driving to? Dodge City, Ethan replied. Have you been there? Katherine nodded. Several times when I was younger. My father used to take me with him when he had business there. It is rough and loud and utterly fascinating. I loved watching the cattle drives come in, all those cowboys and all that noise and activity. They talked for hours, sitting on a fallen log by the creek, and Ethan marveled at how easy it was to talk to Katherine. She listened intently when he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own stories and dreams. She told him about her father's death from pneumonia the previous winter, about the difficult decision to leave Kansas and start over in Colorado, about her hopes to eventually open a dress shop of her own. I have always loved sewing, Katherine explained, her face animated with passion. Ever since I was a little girl, my mother taught me, and I have a knack for it, or so people tell me. I have been making clothes for the ladies in town, just small alterations and repairs for now, but I dream of having my own shop someday, creating beautiful dresses for special occasions. That sounds wonderful, Ethan said sincerely. And I think you would be successful. You certainly have the drive and determination for it. The sun was beginning to set when they finally made their way back to the Warren house. At the front door, Ethan hesitated, not wanting the afternoon to end. Katherine seemed to feel the same way, lingering on the porch steps. I had a lovely time today, Katherine said softly. Thank you for the walk and the conversation. It was truly wonderful. May I call on you again? Ethan asked. Perhaps next Sunday? I would like that, Katherine said, and then on impulse she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a quick, feather-light touch that sent electricity racing through Ethan's veins. Before he could react, she had slipped inside, leaving him standing on the porch with his hand pressed to where her lips had touched his skin. Ethan rode home in a daze, his mind replaying every moment of the afternoon. He had never felt this way about anyone, this mix of excitement and contentment, of longing and peace. Katherine Thompson had somehow, in the space of a few days, become the most important person in his world, and the realization both thrilled and terrified him. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Ethan cherished. Every Sunday after church, he would call on Katherine, and they would spend the afternoon together, walking through town or sitting on the Warren porch, talking for hours. During the week, Ethan would find excuses to ride into Colorado City, stopping by the Warren house with fresh vegetables from the ranch garden or a book he thought Katherine might enjoy. Katherine, for her part, seemed equally eager for his visits, her face lighting up whenever she saw him approaching. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, moving from the tentative excitement of new attraction to something richer and more profound. Ethan found himself sharing things with Katherine that he had never told anyone else, his fears and doubts, his dreams and ambitions. Katherine, in turn, opened up to him about her grief over her father's death, about the challenges of starting over in a new place, about her own dreams and hopes for the future. 6 weeks after their first meeting, Ethan took Katherine on a picnic to a beautiful meadow on Double Bar land, a place where wildflowers grew in profusion, and the view of the mountains was spectacular. They ate fried chicken and biscuits that Eleanor had packed for them, and afterward they lay in the grass, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "I think I am falling in love with you," Ethan said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "No, that is not quite right. I have already fallen. I am in love with you, Katherine Thompson. Completely and utterly in love with you." Katherine turned to look at him, her brown eyes wide and shimmering with emotion. "I am in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been since the moment I opened my eyes and saw you kneeling beside the creek. You saved my life that day, Ethan. But you have done so much more than that. You have given me hope and joy and a reason to look forward to tomorrow." Ethan leaned in and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. Catherine's arms came around his neck, pulling him closer, and for a long moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only Katherine and Ethan, and the love growing between them, strong and true and absolutely right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against Catherine's, his hand cupping her cheek. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is soon, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me, Katherine?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, a radiant, joyful expression that made Ethan's heart soar. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Ethan Burke." They rode back to Colorado City together, sitting close on Scout's back, making plans and dreaming aloud. They decided to wait until after the cattle drive to marry, partly for practical reasons since Ethan would be gone for several weeks and they needed time to prepare, but also because the money from the drive would allow them to start their married life on solid financial footing. Eleanor cried happy tears when they told her the news, and Samuel Warren opened a bottle of his finest whiskey to toast the engagement. Word spread quickly through Colorado City, and soon it seemed everyone in town knew that Ethan Burke and Katherine Thompson were to be married. The women of the town immediately began planning the wedding, offering advice and assistance, and Katherine found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. The weeks before the cattle drive passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan and James worked long hours getting the herd ready, selecting the best cattle, and making sure everything was in order. Katherine spent her days sewing her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white silk and lace that she poured her heart into. In the evenings, Ethan would ride into town, and they would sit on the porch, holding hands and talking about their future. "I wish I did not have to go on this drive," Ethan said one evening, his thumb tracing circles on the back of Catherine's hand. "I hate the thought of being away from you for 6 weeks." "It will go quickly," Katherine assured him, though her own heart ached at the thought of the coming separation. "And when you get back, we will be married, and then we will never have to be apart again." The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and hot. Ethan rode into town before sunrise to say goodbye to Katherine. She was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the early morning chill, and when Ethan dismounted, she ran into his arms. "Come back to me safely," she whispered against his chest. "That is all I ask. Just come home, safe. I promise," Ethan said, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Nothing will keep me from coming back to you, Katherine. Nothing in this world." He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that held all the love and longing in his heart, and then he forced himself to pull away and mount his horse. Katherine stood on the porch watching as he rode away, one hand pressed to her lips, the other clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders. The cattle drive to Dodge City was long and grueling. Ethan and James, along with 6 hired hands, pushed 200 head of cattle across the Colorado plains and into Kansas, dealing with river crossings, storms, and the occasional attempted theft. It was dangerous, exhausting work, but Ethan barely noticed the hardships. His thoughts were constantly with Katherine, counting down the days until he could return to her. They reached Dodge City in early August, and the cattle sold for excellent prices, even better than Ethan had hoped. Standing in the buyer's office, holding the bank draft that represented months of hard work, Ethan felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. This money would buy the land he wanted, would give him and Catherine a solid foundation for their future. He immediately sent a telegram to Samuel Warren's house, knowing Catherine would be anxiously awaiting word of his safe arrival. The return journey was faster, just the Burke brothers and their horses, leaving the hired hands to make their own way back. Ethan pushed hard, eager to get home, to see Catherine again. They rode into Colorado City on a warm afternoon in late August, dusty and trail-worn but triumphant. Catherine must have been watching for him because she came flying out of the Warren house before Ethan had even fully dismounted, throwing herself into his arms with a cry of joy. Ethan caught her easily, spinning her around, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling like he had finally come home. "I missed you so much," Catherine said, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. "Every day felt like a year. Tell me everything. How was the drive? Did you get good prices? Are you well?" "Everything went perfectly," Ethan assured her, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "The cattle sold for more than I expected. I have enough to buy the land and have plenty left over, and I am fine, just tired and very, very glad to be home." They were married 2 weeks later in the small Colorado City church, with half the town in attendance. Catherine wore the beautiful dress she had made, and Ethan wore his best suit, and when Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed his bride with a tenderness and joy that brought tears to more than one eye in the congregation. The reception was held at the Warren house with tables of food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Ethan and Catherine danced together repeatedly, lost in each other, oblivious to the crowd around them. When they finally left for the Double Bar Ranch that would now be their home, it was to a shower of rice and well wishes. Catherine had visited the ranch before, of course, but arriving as Mrs. Burke felt different, momentous. Ethan carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure that had been in the Burke family for 20 years. James had tactfully made himself scarce for the evening, taking a bedroll out to the bunkhouse to give the newlyweds privacy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Burke," Ethan said softly, setting Catherine down in the parlor and taking both her hands in his. "It feels right," Catherine said, looking around at the space that would now be hers. "This place, being here with you, it all feels exactly right." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of the love they had found in each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, talking softly in the darkness, making plans and promises. Life at the Double Bar fell into a comfortable rhythm. Catherine proved to be a natural rancher's wife, adapting quickly to the rhythms and demands of ranch life. She tended a large garden, learned to cook for hungry ranch hands, and managed the household with efficiency and grace. In her spare time, she continued with her sewing, taking in work from the ladies in town, building a reputation for exquisite craftsmanship. Ethan used the money from the cattle drive to purchase the land he wanted, expanding the Double Bar's holdings significantly. With Catherine's support and James's help, he worked to improve the ranch, building new outbuildings, upgrading their fencing, increasing their herd. The ranch prospered under his management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. But more than the ranch's success, it was the life Ethan and Catherine built together that truly mattered. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other, challenging each other, loving each other with a depth and commitment that grew stronger with each passing day. They laughed together over breakfast, worked side by side during the day, and fell asleep in each other's arms at night, and Ethan never stopped being grateful for the twist of fate that had led him past Willow Creek on that May afternoon. Catherine's dream of opening a dress shop came true 2 years after their wedding. A small building on Colorado City's Main Street became available, and Ethan insisted on buying it for her, using his own money to outfit it with everything she needed. Catherine's dress shop opened in the spring of 1878 to great fanfare, and within a month she had more orders than she could handle. She hired two assistants, young women from town who were eager to learn the sewing trade, and the business thrived. James married the following year, wedding a sweet-spirited young woman named Rebecca Miller, and he and his bride built their own house on the northern section of the Double Bar property. It was good to have family close, good to watch James find the same kind of happiness that Ethan had found with Katherine. In the summer of 1879, Katherine announced that she was expecting their first child. Ethan was beside himself with joy and anxiety, fussing over Katherine constantly, worried about every little thing. Katherine bore his hovering with patience and amusement, assuring him repeatedly that she was fine, that pregnancy was natural, and she was perfectly healthy. Their son was born in February of 1880, a lusty, healthy boy with Ethan's green eyes and Katherine's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Ethan's beloved uncle, and from the moment Ethan held his son for the first time, he understood a whole new dimension of love. Watching Katherine with their baby, seeing her nurse him and sing to him, Ethan felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst with the sheer weight of his happiness. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah Eleanor, after Ethan's former fiancée and Katherine's mother. This caused some raised eyebrows in town, but Ethan explained to anyone who asked that he held no ill will towards Sarah Mitchell and that she and Katherine's mother deserved to be honored. Little Sarah was a beautiful baby with Katherine's features and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone who met her. The years passed in a steady stream of hard work, joy, and occasional challenges. The Double Bar continued to prosper, becoming one of the largest and most respected ranches in Colorado. Katherine's dress shop grew as well, eventually expanding to occupy the building next door, offering not just dresses, but all manner of fine clothing and fabric goods. The Burke children grew healthy and strong, Thomas becoming a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father on the ranch, and Sarah developing into a bright, inquisitive girl who seemed to have inherited both her mother's creative talents and her father's determination. In 1885, Katherine gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named William. By this time, Ethan was 34 and Katherine 31, and they decided that their family was complete. 3 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a successful business, and most importantly, a love that had only deepened and strengthened over the years. They were blessed beyond measure, and they both knew it. Eleanor Thompson lived to see all her grandchildren born, spending her final years helping Katherine with the children and the household. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1887 at the age of 63, surrounded by the family who loved her. Samuel Warren, who had remained a close friend to the Burke family over the years, followed her 2 years later, leaving a substantial portion of his estate to Katherine and her children, a final gesture of affection for the family who had brought so much light into his life. As the 19th century drew to a close, Ethan and Katherine Burke looked back on their lives together with profound satisfaction. What had begun with a desperate rescue from a swollen creek had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a love story that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. One warm evening in May of 1896, exactly 20 years after the day they met, Ethan and Katherine sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were grown now, Thomas at 16 already taking on more responsibility at the ranch, Sarah at 14 showing remarkable talent as a seamstress and helping her mother in the shop, and William at 11 still young enough to be fascinated by everything around him. "Do you ever think about that day at the creek?" Katherine asked, her hand finding Ethan's and lacing their fingers together. "Every day," Ethan replied honestly. "I think about how easily I might have ridden past, might have been looking the other way, might have been too late. I think about how different my life would be if I had not pulled you from that water." "I think about it too," Katherine said softly, "about how close I came to dying before I had really lived. But you saved me, Ethan. You saved my life that day, and you have made my life worth living every day since." Ethan turned to look at his wife, This woman who had been his partner and companion for 20 years, who had given him children and built a life with him, who still made his heart race when she smiled. Age had only enhanced her beauty, adding character and depth to her features, and the love he felt for her was as strong now as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger. "I love you, Katherine Burke," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from Willow Creek, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Katherine replied, leaning in to kiss him, a sweet, tender kiss that spoke of years of shared joy and sorrow, of a bond that nothing could break. "My cowboy, my hero, my everything." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the world settle into evening. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle bedded down for the night, the horses drowsing in their stalls. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, Thomas helping William with arithmetic homework, while Sarah practiced the piano. This was happiness, Ethan thought. This was what he had worked for, what he had dreamed of during those long years before Katherine came into his life. A home, a family, a love that anchored him and gave meaning to everything he did. And it had all started with a moment of crisis, a woman drowning in a creek, and a cowboy who had been in the right place at the right time. Over the following years, the Burke family continued to thrive. Thomas married at 21, wedding Anna Foster, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and they built a house on the eastern section of the Double Bar. Within a year, they presented Ethan and Katherine with their first grandchild, a boy named Ethan Thomas Burke, and Katherine cried happy tears as she held her grandson for the first time. Sarah proved to have not just her mother's talent for sewing, but also a head for business. At 18, she took over the management of Katherine's dress shop, implementing new ideas and expanding the business even further. She married at 23, choosing Robert Harrison, a lawyer who had recently set up practice in Colorado City, and they remained in town, Sarah continuing to run the shop with enthusiasm and success. William, the youngest, surprised everyone by deciding he wanted to study medicine. At 17, he left for medical school in Denver, and 4 years later, he returned to Colorado City as Dr. William Burke, setting up a practice that quickly became essential to the community. He married Julia Sanders, a teacher at the local school, and they had 2 daughters who brought endless joy to Ethan and Katherine's later years. As Ethan moved into his 50s and then 60s, he gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas, though he never fully retired. He loved the land too much, loved the work too much to ever completely stop. Katherine, too, remained active, still designing special pieces for the dress shop, even as Sarah handled the day-to-day management. They grew old together gracefully, their love never diminishing, only transforming into something even richer and deeper. They knew each other so completely that they could communicate with a glance, could finish each other's sentences, could anticipate each other's needs and wants. They had weathered everything life could throw at them: financial difficulties, illness, the normal trials and tribulations of raising children and running businesses. Through it all, they had remained a team, united in their love and commitment. In the spring of 1911, Colorado City celebrated its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town, and Ethan and Katherine were honored as 2 of the community's founding families. They stood together at the celebration, now in their 60s, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and listened as the mayor spoke about their contributions to the town's growth and prosperity. "The Burke family represents everything that is best about Colorado City," the mayor declared. "Hard work, integrity, commitment to community, and enduring love. Ethan and Katherine Burke are a testament to what 2 people can build when they work together in partnership and devotion." Katherine squeezed Ethan's hand, and he looked down at her, this woman who had been the center of his world for 35 years, and smiled. She smiled back, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a way he had always loved, and in that moment, Ethan felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt all those years ago when he pulled her from Willow Creek. They lived to see the world change dramatically around them. The Wild West of their youth gave way to something more settled and civilized. Automobiles appeared on the streets of Colorado City, electricity came to the town, and the ranch. The open range of the past was replaced by fenced pastures and more modern ranching methods. Through it all, the Double Bar adapted and survived, remaining a Burke family enterprise. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1924 at the age of 73. He had spent the day working on the ranch, riding out to check on the cattle with Thomas, despite his son's protests that he should rest. That evening, he had dinner with Katherine, just the two of them, as had been their custom for decades, and they had talked about their plans for the next day, for the summer, for the future. Katherine had kissed him good night as she had every night of their married life, and when she woke in the morning, he was gone, a peaceful expression on his face. Katherine grieved deeply for her husband, but she did not let the grief consume her. She had their children and grandchildren. She had the ranch and the town they had built together. She had 48 years of memories to sustain her. She lived another 6 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community until the very end. When Katherine Thompson Burke died in her sleep in January of 1930 at the age of 76, she was buried beside Ethan in the Colorado City Cemetery. Their children commissioned a beautiful headstone, a single large marker that bore both their names and a simple inscription, "Together in life, together in eternity," bound by a love that began in Willow Creek and lasted forever. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through generations of Burkes, the tale of the drowning woman and the cowboy who saved her, of love found in a moment of crisis and nurtured through decades of partnership and devotion. Their descendants, spread across Colorado and beyond, told and retold the story, each generation finding new meaning and inspiration in it. The Double Bar Ranch remained in the Burke family, passed down from Thomas to his children and then to their children. Katherine's dress shop eventually closed in the 1950s as fashions changed and ready-made clothing became more common, but the building remained, converted into other businesses, but always bearing a small plaque that read, "Site of Katherine's Dress Shop, founded 1878 by Katherine Thompson Burke." The love story of Ethan and Katherine Burke became a part of Colorado City's history, a reminder of the town's roots and the people who had built it. Every spring, when Willow Creek swelled with snowmelt, older residents would remember the story and tell it to younger generations, ensuring that it would never be forgotten. And though Ethan and Katherine were long gone, the legacy of their love lived on in their descendants, in the ranch they had built, in the businesses they had established, and in the very fabric of the town they had called home. They had started with nothing but love and determination, a cowboy and the woman he saved from drowning, and they had built something that endured, something that mattered. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest triumph of all. Not just that they had loved each other deeply and completely for 48 years, but that their love had rippled outward, touching countless lives and creating a legacy that would last for generations. They had proven that a single moment of courage and compassion could change everything, that love could transform not just two lives, but an entire community. The creek still flows through Colorado City, its waters sometimes gentle, sometimes treacherous, always changing yet always the same. And if you stand on its banks on a warm spring day and listen carefully, you might almost hear the echoes of a long ago rescue, of a cowboy jumping into the water without hesitation, of a woman being pulled to safety, of a love story beginning in the most dramatic way possible. That is how legends are born, in moments of crisis and courage, in the spark between two souls, recognizing something profound in each other. Ethan and Katherine Burke's story was one such legend, a tale of the Wild West that was as much about love and devotion as it was about adventure and survival. And though the West eventually became less wild, though the frontier closed and civilization encroached, their story remained, a testament to the enduring power of love and the miraculous way that life can change in a single moment. For Ethan, that moment came when he saw something pale thrashing in Willow Creek and made the split-second decision to help. For Catherine, it came when she opened her eyes on the muddy creek bank and saw the man who had saved her life. Neither of them could have known, in that dramatic moment, that they had just met the person with whom they would spend the rest of their lives, the person who would become their partner, their confidant, their great love. But that is the nature of fate, unexpected and unplanned, arriving when you least expect it and changing everything in an instant. Ethan Burke rode past Willow Creek on countless occasions before and after that fateful May Day in 1876, but only once did he find someone drowning there. Only once did he jump in without thinking. Only once did he pull a beautiful woman from the water and fall completely in love. And Katherine Thompson went to the creek to wash clothes many times before that day, but only once did she lose her footing and nearly lose her life. Only once did a handsome cowboy appear like something out of a dream to save her. Only once did she look into a stranger's eyes and see her entire future reflected back at her. That is the magic and mystery of love, the way it can strike like lightning, unexpected and overwhelming, transforming everything it touches. Ethan and Catherine were fortunate enough to recognize it when it came, wise enough to nurture it, and strong enough to protect it through all the years that followed. Their love was tested by time, by hardship, by all the normal trials of life, and it emerged not just intact but stronger, deeper, richer. They built a life together on the foundation of that love, a life filled with hard work and joy, with children and grandchildren, with success and satisfaction. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, each making the other better, each supporting the other through whatever challenges arose. And when their time finally came to an end, they left behind a legacy that extended far beyond themselves, touching everyone who had known them and everyone who would come after. The Double Bar Ranch still stands today, though much changed from the operation Ethan and his father started so many years ago. It is run now by his great-great-grandchildren, men and women who have never met Ethan or Catherine, but who carry their blood and their legacy. The land they loved is still there, the mountains they watched from their porch, the creeks and meadows and wide open spaces. Colorado City has grown considerably from the small settlement of 300 that Ethan and Catherine knew. It is now a thriving town of several thousand, with paved streets and modern amenities, though it still retains some of the charm and character of its frontier days. The old church where Ethan and Catherine were married was replaced by a larger structure in the 1920s, but the cemetery where they rest together remains, a peaceful spot on a hillside overlooking the town they helped build. And Willow Creek still flows, sometimes calm and gentle, sometimes wild and dangerous, always beautiful. It runs past the site where Catherine nearly drowned and where Ethan saved her life, past the meadow, where they had their first picnic, past the Double Bar Ranch, where they built their life together. The creek remembers, if such things can remember, the role it played in bringing them together, the way its treacherous current created the circumstances for love to bloom. That is the final truth of Ethan and Catherine's story. Love does not always arrive in convenient or expected ways. Sometimes it comes in moments of crisis, born from fear and danger and the courage to act despite the risk. Sometimes the greatest loves begin with the greatest challenges, testing us immediately, forcing us to reveal who we really are when everything is on the line. Ethan Burke jumped into a swollen creek to save a stranger, and in doing so, he found the great love of his life. Katherine Thompson nearly drowned, and in being saved, she found her soulmate. They took that dramatic beginning and built from it something lasting and true, something that endured through decades and challenges, something that ultimately transcended even death. Their story reminds us that life can change in an instant, that a single decision can alter the course of everything that follows, that courage and compassion can lead to rewards beyond imagination. It reminds us that love is worth fighting for, worth nurturing, worth protecting at all costs. And it reminds us that the best stories, the ones that endure and inspire, are not about perfection, but about real people facing real challenges and choosing again and again to love and support each other through it all. As the sun sets over Colorado City on any given evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and pink, you can still feel the presence of those who came before, the pioneers and ranchers and ordinary people who built something extraordinary in this wild, beautiful place. And among them, the spirits of Ethan and Katherine Burke seem to linger, forever bound together, forever young in the moment when he pulled her from the creek and she looked into his eyes and everything changed. That is what love does. It transforms us, saves us, gives us purpose and meaning and joy. It connects us to something larger than ourselves, creates bonds that transcend time and space. Ethan and Catherine understood this truth deeply, lived it fully, and left behind a testament to its power that continues to inspire anyone who hears their story. From a drowning woman and a cowboy on horseback to a love story that spanned nearly 5 decades and touched countless lives, their journey was remarkable. But perhaps what made it most special was its very ordinariness beneath the dramatic beginning. They were not royalty or celebrities, not people of particular fame or fortune. They were simply two people who found each other, loved each other, and built a good life together. In that simplicity lies the universal appeal of their story, the reason it has endured and will continue to endure. Because we all hope for that kind of love, that deep connection, that partnership that makes everything else worthwhile. We all dream of finding the person who sees us truly, who loves us completely, who stands beside us through whatever life brings. Ethan and Catherine found that in each other, and in finding it, they gave hope to everyone who heard their story that such love is possible, that it is real, that it is worth waiting for and working toward. And so their legacy continues, not just in the land and businesses and descendants they left behind, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who has ever heard how a cowboy jumped into a creek to save a drowning woman and found in that moment of crisis and courage the great love of his life. It is a reminder that miracles do happen, that fate does intervene, and that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, arriving in a splash of creek water and a stranger's strong arms pulling us to safety and toward a future more beautiful than we ever imagined possible.